Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a big approach. Why so serious? Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 545 for July 31st, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm a pirate, but I'm also Brennan Cassidy.
Yeah, thanks for joining us for this show, everybody.
That'll make sense later.
Yeah, it will make a little bit sense later. Brendan, what is a pirate's favorite letter?
Oh, you're doing a dad joke, aren't you?
Maybe.
I'm trying to think of something clever to say other than just R.
Well, that's what you're supposed to say.
I know, but I was trying to think of something more clever. But that's the answer to the joke, right?
That is the answer to the joke, but then I'm supposed to rebuttal with the real answer is C because his real love is for the sea.
Oh, there's that too. I forgot about that part. Oh yeah.
So,
okay. Good one.
It just
Thanks,
makes
Dad.
sense to open with a really dumb pirates joke, being the father of two now.
Yeah.
People got to realize I have a new one in the house.
He's been practicing.
The dad jokes just double up on themselves. We are going to talk a little Pirates of the Caribbean this week because Disney just released their latest film based off of one of their thrill rides, Haunted Mansion. Brendan, have you been to Magic Kingdom? Have you been on the Haunted Mansion?
Oh, yeah, I have a few times. But, I mean, admittedly, the last time I've been to Disney World was probably in high school. So that was, I think, maybe 2011 at the very latest. Of course, the Haunted Mansion was still there. And from what I understand, you've been there more recently, JD. That ride hasn't really changed much. I feel like that's kind of like a legacy ride or more like a show. I feel like it's more of a show than it is a ride. It's more of a thrill in many ways. But I've always loved the ambiance and the craft of that one. But yeah, I've been on that one. Admittedly, it's one of the first rides that ever truly scared me as a kid.
Oh wow!
My first ever memory of riding that ride was when I first went to Disney World with my family. I think I was 6 years old, maybe 7.
Okay.
And I spent the entire ride with my hood over my head.
Oh, wow.
Listening to the way my parents described all the ghouls and ghosts that were surrounding our cart. And I was like, I don't want to look. I'm scared. So it just goes to show what used to scare me as a kid.
Well, see, that's really interesting. I do love that we have very different experiences because, and I've noted this on the show before, but it's been quite a long time. I'm sure we have a lot of new listeners or viewers on YouTube who don't know, but I didn't go to Disney until I was an adult. So it was right as, I want to say, as I was engaged to Brandy. I don't think we had gotten married yet. It was certainly pre being a father. And, they took me, my wife and her family, they took me to Disney. So this was like 2013, something like that.
Okay.
And, when it's your first time, even as an adult, I still remember this vividly, walking in and immediately being transformed into a 6-year-old. Like just being giddy.
It just has that magic, man. It just has that magic.
It does. You grow up with all of the Disney films and, then there's something like Pirates of the Caribbean, which had come out, which I had, I think the first one came out when I was in high school or right as I was transitioning from high school to college.
2003.
And then the sequels come out as I was in college or post-college. And, so I had seen all those movies, a lot of the Disney live action films up to that point. And so walking in, it was pretty magical. It was a lot of fun. So, I can't speak to the longevity of Haunted Mansion and what's changed over the years because I've only been going to Disney, I guess, since 2013 or so. But we do live here in Florida. We even lived in Gainesville, Florida for a few years. So we were really close to Orlando. And during that time, we would go very often, like probably a dozen times a year.
Okay. Yeah.
Now that I live in South Florida, we have to be a little bit more diligent in our planning because it's a good 3-hour trip or so.
Yeah.
But we do normally get there about twice a year, typically at the very least.
Still more than me.
we're there often. It's a fun thing for us to indulge in. I've been on Haunted Mansion plenty of times, and it's one of my favorite rides because it's usually one of the ones we do last. Because when we get there, we immediately take a hard right into Tomorrowland. That's where we start.
Yep, good
and then
call.
kind of make our way around. And when you've been in Magic Kingdom all day, and it's hot, and you're sweaty, and your feet are hurting, Haunted Mansion is perfect because you get in line, and then once you get inside, it is dark.
It's cool.
Cold.
Yeah. You're sitting down. The ride doesn't move too fast.
Exactly. It is like the perfect chill ride. So
yeah, and if you say it that way, which is really funny considering how that ride scared me as a kid. It's like I mean, obviously I went on it again when I was in high school. I've done 2 trips to Disney World in high school because I was in marching band at my high school, and every other year we marched in the Magic Kingdom parade. So we had 2 trips there. And both of those times I did ride the Haunted Mansion and actually, experience it. And I couldn't help but laugh at my 6-year-old self being afraid of that. It's not a scary ride, but you mentioned something that I found really funny. It's the fact that much of Magic Kingdom itself is all about bringing out the child in you. It's really just the vibe. But when you have to simultaneously work the day that you're there with us being in the Magic Kingdom parade, we were marching it. Obviously, there are many attributes of it being backstage, waiting for us to actually enter into the parade. So we saw things we never would have wanted to see.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like whoever was playing Snow White that day, sitting out having a cigarette, things like that. It just kind of ruins the fun. But anyway, all that to say, it's a good ride. It's a really fun ride, and you're right. It is a great way to close out the day.
It really is impeccable in that regard, and I really do enjoy it. And as you're talking about, the craft of it is, it's really well done. There's a lot of fun to be had just enjoying
the
architecture of it.
Yeah, that's great.
And there's always one little bit where you kind of go down this little ramp, and as you make this turn to your left, there's this little segment where it is the bride, and she has the knife in her hand, and implying that she killed her husband there. And Brandy always points to that one. She's like,
it's like, be careful,
or else.
Be careful.
Like it's always.
Otherwise, you'll be part of the new attraction of the Haunted Mansion.
Exactly. Yeah. Every time she makes that joke. And,
Brandy,
it's a great time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that is to say, like, I don't know what to expect from the movie. The trailers look a little tepid to me, but
which is kind of funny.
Maybe some fun there. I don't know.
Which is kind of funny. I was actually watching the trailer earlier today. I haven't seen the film, and to be perfectly honest, I don't mean to sound cynical, but I'm not terribly interested in the film, if I'm being honest. But looking at the trailer and just looking at the way it's designed, the way it's lit, just the visual palette of it, and knowing that film cost more money than both Barbie and Oppenheimer. We've been talking about this a lot, right, JD? That movie costs and just simply making a good movie is really part of this conversation we've been having about Hollywood in general. And I think that could also be funneled through Haunted Mansion, because I might really enjoy the movie if I go and see it. But I mean, visually speaking, from what I'm seeing from the marketing, it doesn't look very palatable, if you ask me. It looks cheaper than some of these other movies that cost less.
Oh, I agree. I agree. It has that Disney sheen to it that we've criticized many a times over the years. And it just simply looks like there wasn't a lot of love put into it. Like there was no vision. This is something they did as a money grab, which it's Disney, so that's a lot of what they do. Yeah. Which is interesting to me. And we'll get to this here in a little bit. I'm getting ahead of myself. When you compare that to that original Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy at the very least, there was a vision there, and there was art poured into those movies, which we'll get to. And I just feel like I don't know if they caught lightning in a bottle, or if it's just a matter of that idea of ambition versus let's just make as much money as we can.
Oh, we'll talk about it.
So-
And maybe those movies are an outlier because The Haunted Mansion has been adapted into a movie before.
Yes.
Which
yes.
that's a movie I have seen many years ago. I don't quite remember it, but I remember finding it kind of. I remember that one being kind of tepid. The one with Eddie Murphy back in the day.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is it's not like this is new waters for them.
No, it's not. It just seems like Disney, since that initial Pirates of the Caribbean, especially, because they've done live action before, but since that first Pirates movie, they've tried to recapture whatever Gore Verbinski was doing with those movies, and it just hasn't really been there. It just hasn't been there. We'll get
of the
to
story.
that.
Yeah, get Gore Verbinski.
Yeah,
Get gory. Get gory.
Get gory. Absolutely. We'll get more into that here in a minute. We were going to start the show with that and spend most of our time here talking about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies because we haven't seen The Haunted Mansion, and I don't know if we will anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
However, while we'll get to Pirates here in a little bit, there was some big news that dropped earlier today. Very saddening news as Paul Reubens, best known for portraying Pee Wee Herman, died after a private bout of cancer at the age of 70. And Brendan, you have been on the record many a times as being a massive fan of Pee Wee Herman and Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure in particular. Yeah. So I wanted to give you the floor here. I know this was a character, an actor that was massive to your childhood. So I just wanted to give you some space here to talk about that.
Well, I think he was one of the first actors that I noticed as a child. Like I noticed the versatility of, right? Mm-hmm. Because we'll obviously talk about his comedic timing and his portrayal of Pee Wee Herman that he's obviously known for. And for the record, I was not really an avid watcher of Pee Wee's Playhouse, the TV show. I was really just an avid fan of Pee Wee's Big Adventure, the Tim Burton film, which I still think is one of Tim Burton's better movies. That's like probably top 5 Tim Burton for me, honestly. And some of that is due to nostalgia, but I still think it's a very funny and clever and witty movie. But yeah, like I said, he was one of those first actors that I really noticed versatility because he was so known for such a vibrant and voice throwing character, right? I mean, the squeakiness of Pee Wee Herman, right? And then you would see him in a movie like Matilda. Remember the movie Matilda with Danny DeVito, and he played one of the FBI agents, and you actually hear him speak in a normal voice, and he's got this very deep, almost monotone kind of presentation. It was seeing him in a movie like Dunstan Checks In. Remember this?
Oh my God!
Remember that movie? Again,
wow,
another childhood favorite of mine. I know, yeah. We're getting nostalgia here. But it's, but yeah, like he really was one of those first actors where I noticed what you can do differently. Also, even seeing him as the Penguin's father in an unspoken role in Batman Returns, right? In that opening, like prologue of sorts. But yeah, Pee Wee's Big Adventure, the Tim Burton film from 1985, I think it was. That was on endless repeat when I was a kid. Obviously, I was not born in 1985. I was born in 89, but it's one I started watching pretty regularly when I was maybe 3 years old. And it's a movie that just had a lot of firsts for me. Like I said, first time I really noticed the versatility of an actor. First time I really got scared watching a movie. There was the clown that was waving as his bike was stolen. There's the giant mask in the Mask and Magic shop. Moments that I actually had to run and hide behind the couch came from this movie. The first time I've ever recalled ever doing that as a kid. And yet I always watched that thing. It was one of those VHSs I think I may have worn out. Kind of like how they talk about the stories of classic musicians wearing out their 8-track tapes in their cars. Sure. That was kind of me with the VHS of Pee Wee's Big Adventure. So his death and passing away at the age of 70 due to cancer, and how it was a very private announcement too.
Yeah.
Which in many ways I do respect that he happened to, have that time to spend with his family during this terrible disease he was battling. So there was no interference from the public eye in that regard. I'm glad he had it in the way that he wanted, if that was, the way he wanted. But it is devastating that someone from my childhood that really helped define my artistic upbringing in many ways passed away like this. So he will be missed. He really will. And I do think he is one of the most versatile in the comedic field and one of the most gentle human beings. You know, like there are stories I've heard about, you know, him being on talk shows and just making really close friends with the production assistants just backstage. And he's someone that really helped define my artistic upbringing in a very comedic way. Certainly one of my favorite comedies, Pee-wee's Big Adventure growing up. So yeah, this one does hurt. It really does.
Yeah, and that sentiment has been echoed a lot today when you scour social media.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting about this, as saddening as it is, when you couple what you're talking about there with this last little note that he released, or his family released today, where it said, quote, "Please accept my apology for not going public with what I've been facing the last 6 years. I have always felt a huge amount of love and respect for my friends, fans, and supporters. I have loved you all so much and enjoyed making art for you." Which I think is incredible. Like, such a poignant paragraph there. Just talking about how much he has loved his fans that have enjoyed it. And I love that he articulates it that way in terms of that he enjoyed making art for everybody, which is what he was doing. And a lot of people responded to it. I am unfortunately not one of those. I didn't really grow up with Pee Wee Herman or many of his movies, or, you know, where he was the lead. I have certainly seen Matilda, or The Nightmare Before Christmas, you know, Dr. Dolittle, where he has like these small supporting roles.
Some of them voice performances as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Many of them voice performances. But the Pee Wee Herman character is just something that when I was a little kid didn't really appeal to me all that much. And I haven't really taken the time to revisit any of it since being an adult. I don't really have any idea how I would respond to it now.
I'd be curious.
Adulthood.
Yeah, I'm honestly really interested in reviewing it someday because I mean, it's been a few years since I've seen it, but I do remember a lot of it pretty clearly. That there is just such a, I don't know what the word is, but there's such an inclusiveness to it, an inclusivity to it, in the way that this lovely weirdo embraces other weirdos, which is kind of why it's a perfect Tim Burton movie in many ways. But I'd be very curious to see it from that angle if we ever decide to, you know, revisit it together.
Well, and I would love to do that, actually, because I love early Tim Burton. Like 80s and 90s Tim Burton was incredible. Like I love that guy. I don't know where he went. I would love for him to come back.
from Pee-wee's Big Adventure all the way through to, I guess, Big Fish in many ways. Like that stretch is, not everything's great, but that
a lot
stretch
of what he did was excellent.
Even the ones that aren't that great, like let's say Mars Attacks, for instance. It's still kind of a fascinating movie in many ways, right?
Oh, sure.
But yeah, you're right. That early era of Tim Burton was really quite great.
It was admirable for sure. And he made some really great movies, and I just love the weirdness of his movies, the bold qualities of them. So I would love to go back to revisit Pee-wee's Big Adventure simply from that perspective, but then what we're talking about here with, you know, Pee Wee Herman and that comedic sensibility, that specificity that Reubens brought to that role, which it didn't appeal to me as a kid, but it might now as an adult. That's certainly possible. I don't really know. So I haven't felt the sting with this one like many others have, but I am very much in a minority. The amounts of sentiment I saw that echoed a lot of what you're saying was really quite big, and it was really wonderful to see everyone kind of indulge in their love for the character and really just Reubens as a guy, as a person, as this tender soul who was immaculate with his comedic sensibilities. I wish that I was able to hone in on them as everyone else did, but
you can still discover it.
JV, just he wasn't really watching those things.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, to your point, that is something I can very much discover now as an adult. So at some point, I think that I would love to delve into that a little bit more.
Have you ever seen the movie Mystery Men?
Oh man, yeah, but that came out in
1999, I think it was, maybe 2000.
I was on the verge of high school, so I've seen it, but man, it's been a long time. I don't know if I've seen it since high school.
Yeah, well, Paul Reubens, he's in that as well, and I'm so glad to see on Twitter a few critics and just people in general
talking about that.
calling out that movie, which I think is a pretty underappreciated superhero movie. It's a superhero spoof in many ways, but Paul Reubens in that plays a character named the Spleen, and only Paul Reubens can play that character. Otherwise, he would be the most insufferable thing ever put into a movie. And in many ways, he still is, but he's kind of a lovable, insufferable thing. So, and it just goes to show the balance that he had, because so many characters that he played, especially in his more vocally vibrant roles, they're ones that any other actor could turn into someone like that basically comes off as nails on the chalkboard. And he finds the lovability in the annoyance, which is a weird thing to balance together, but it somehow works. And it's like he does it without even trying,
Yeah, sure.
And I sense that in a lot of his, goofier characters, such as Pee Wee Herman or the Spleen from Mystery Men. And I think that's another great performance of his for sure.
Yeah, that would be another one I'd have to revisit. The film that came to mind for me, the one performance or character that I could immediately connect with is Flight of the Navigator, which I saw some people talking about as well.
Yeah,
where he's the voice of Max.
Yeah.
And that, because that was a film that I was able to see several times over as a kid. And I always liked that character in that movie. So that was one that I could connect with. But yeah, Pee Wee Herman is one I need to discover or rediscover as an adult. It just wasn't a thing for me as a kid.
That's fair. That's fair.
It's been great though to see everyone else talk about how they did love that. And how he was such a big part of everyone's childhood. So
absolutely. And I know we're on the subject of, Hollywood grief, I guess we can call this segment. And I know we're focusing on Paul Reubens, but I feel like it's worthwhile to at least acknowledge and change gears a little bit that the actor from Euphoria, Angus Cloud, I think his name was, passed away the same day as we're recording this. He was only 25 years old, and admittedly, I'm not a watcher of Euphoria, but I've heard great things about it.
Same.
And actor Angus Cloud, I'm not too familiar with outside of just knowing that he's on the show Euphoria, and I feel like that's really all he's mostly known for, if I'm not mistaken. But I did at least want to acknowledge his passing as well, primarily because no one should be passing away that young. I don't know what the circumstances were. I really don't. So I feel a little ignorant to that, but I at least wanted to acknowledge that we're not overlooking someone else that passed away on the same day as well. It's just as devastating in its own right.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I haven't seen that show. I did read that Euphoria, that he had no acting experience prior to Euphoria.
Oh, I didn't even know that. That's incredible.
But he became one of the more charming elements of that show. Again, I haven't seen it. Those are just some things that I read.
Right.
And that he became one of the best things about it. The other thing I do know about it is that, people had talked about how, I believe it was just a week ago, his father died. And
oh my gosh.
He really struggled with his father's passing. I don't know the details surrounding any of that or his death, but it does seem as if that family is really suffering. So our hearts and thoughts and prayers certainly out to the Cloud family, because that sounds awful. And I can't even fathom what they're going through right now. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
So I haven't seen Euphoria, but did hear some things about him in that regard, and my heart definitely breaks for him and his whole family for sure.
Same.
Okay, with that, there's no easy way to transition here. We're just going to take a hard right turn to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean. Disney's best live action movies, one could argue.
Oh, the top 3 live action movies from Disney are the 3 Pirates movies. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I think so. With Curse of the Black Pearl coming out in 2003, I think.
Yes, 2003 was in both of our top 10s from that year when we did our 2003 retrospective.
So,
in fact, I don't know if you did, but I think I even had it higher than Lord of the Rings: Return of the King.
I don't know if I went that high, but I love this movie.
I do too.
Yeah, it's really great. And with this conversation, I guess just to lay our cards out on the table, we're not necessarily giving full reviews for these 3 movies.
Right.
We've talked about these before in the past. We actually, or specifically Ryan and Jay on Extra Film, they did do a Gore Verbinski movie series.
They did, yeah.
And, they, of course, talked about these 3 movies. So there are full reviews of these that you can go and listen on your podcast app of choice, or just head on over to InSessionFilm.com. You can find it all there. So we're not going to regurgitate Ryan and Jay's reviews here. But we will just simply talk about these movies as a trilogy, and perhaps why they resonate more and more with with how Hollywood is treating modern blockbusters these days. And the Haunted Mansion comes out, and I do want to be a little fair to Haunted Mansion because I haven't quite seen it, but you look through some reviews, you see the box office, and clearly, not many people are enticed by Haunted Mansion.
No, they're still enticed by Barbenheimer.
They're very much enticed by Barbenheimer.
And I'm still wearing pink 2 weeks in a row here.
I know. I was wearing pink earlier today, but as I've noted, I have a 4-year-old. I have a 4-month-old.
Yeah, I was going to say it.
And babies, as they don't keep
they don't hold things in. Yeah, so it's probably better to wear dark clothes, right?
Yeah, so they will, you when you're a parent of a baby, you go through shirts throughout the day. That's just how your
probably
life
buy
is.
more dark and neutral colors,
So
right?
I'm on like my 4th shirt of the evening. And so I had to change before we got on the show here, but but yeah, people are very much enticed by Barbenheimer. But I do want to say this though about Pirates of the Caribbean, and I kind of teased this a little bit earlier because you watch these movies, and I did watch all 3 of them over the weekend.
Oh,
in
nice.
preparation for this conversation, and I just find it astounding how well these movies hold up. All 3 of them are quite good.
Yeah.
Very good.
What is your ranking of the 3? Is it release order for them?
Well, so Curse of the Black Pearl, I think, will always be my favorite of the 3.
Sure, same here.
That film is so good. And I want to say pre this weekend, I would probably go in release order 1, 2, 3. But I kind of, on this rewatch, I kind of loved 3 a little bit more.
I'm with you there. Yeah.
And I think there are 2 reasons why. One, it has a little bit of a darker underbelly to it, with that opening of the hangings is kind of creepy and poignant, and it's
how did Disney let Gore Verbinski do that?
Again, in the context of today, that's not a sequence that would get the green light. They would cut that in a heartbeat, right?
I do have a theory, but you keep talking, then I'll get to why I think that maybe he got away with it.
So there's that element of it. The Johnny Depp and Davy Jones locker, that whole sequence has a Verbinski weirdness to it that I love. And there's also them passing through all of the dead bodies, and there's something about that whole sequence that again embodies this. It just has a tinge of a darker underbelly than what you would expect from Disney in the modern era. And then the other thing that I think has really started to separate itself from the second movie, Barbossa, is back.
Yeah.
And that character, oh my, Jeffrey Rush, I will say this to the day I die. He deserved an Oscar for that role. I don't care what movie. He is so good at these movies.
We're not going to. We're focusing on the trilogy, right? We're obviously not going to be talking about On Stranger Tides or Dem Med Tell No Tales, which are clearly the lesser. Well, I mean, what I was about to say was that the only reason why I'll put Dead Men Tell No Tales above On Stranger Tides is because of Jeffrey Rush.
Yes,
in that one
I
moment
agree.
towards the end.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Barbosa is just spectacular in these movies and is endlessly quotable. Everything he does just elicits this magnetism that just bursts into the frame. And he's just having a lot of fun, and that's what these movies are meant to be, right? Like there is a lot of fun to be had, and he plays it up to 10, but it's so great. Like he's playing it up, but not overly over the top. Like it still functions within the confines of what these movies are trying to be. And there is like a dramatic backbone to them as well.
Yeah.
And there's a craft to these movies. It's not just, hey, here's $200 million, go make a blockbuster, and who cares what you do? People will come and see it.
Yeah.
It's not that at all. Like
no,
there is a real vision here and a narrative that brings it all together. That's, certainly a little contrived at times and manufactured, but on the whole, I think the writing does a great job of, letting these characters breathe a little bit for them to just play it up, have some fun, but also, bring stability to that dramatic and emotional through line that we see throughout, all three of them. And it just threads that needle impeccably, I think. And Barbosa is certainly a big part of that.
He is certainly a big part of that, and he has a really strong presence in At World's End that certainly keeps your eyes on the screen and your interest there. But I'm with you. I've always found At World's End, as messy as that film is, I find it really fascinating. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of appreciated these three films for being a bit loose in their narratives and trying to challenge the audience as far as what trust ultimately is. Because I feel like with movies like this, team up movies like this, especially swashbucklers that don't necessarily deal with pirate lore, we're kind of conditioned to, see this camaraderie, right? This team up of sorts and enjoy their time together. But At World's End kind of suggests that maybe these characters don't really like each other all that much, that they're really just using each other for their own selfish gains. But that's kind of the pirate ethos. I mean, that is the pirate ethos, right? Every man for themselves, right? So, and it's also why I've also appreciated The Curse of the Black Pearl more as time has gone on, because it's a movie that's really testing what allegiance ultimately is. It's about the anti-heroes. It's not really a movie about heroes and villains. There's really no clear, like, good versus evil in any of these movies. I'd say the one that's the easiest, I should say, to, I guess, follow is Dead Man's Chest, because it has a very direct MacGuffin that's kind of tying everyone together. So when I was younger, that was my favorite of the three, but now I see it as perhaps the most simple-minded of the three in that regard.
It's still a good movie, though.
I mean,
I do really like it.
I'm not trying to say that as a knock on the film. It's just I feel more challenged by the bookends of this trilogy nowadays. And whether that's something that Gore Verbinski intended, I don't know. It's possible that with At World's End, at least, he just let the narrative get the better of him and it kind of ran with itself. But I think given the fact that this is about pirate lore, that is ultimately about people that are just selfish, right? And that's kind of the whole point of this. So the whole back and forth and double crossing of all that made more sense as I looked at it from that angle.
I mean, what I love with what you're talking about there, it's easy to point that more directly at the more conventional pirates, let's say between Jack Sparrow and Barbosa and Davy Jones and where they all fit within the confines of what you're talking about. And Cutler Beckett becomes a significant part of that as well. However, our lovebirds, Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann, also get caught up in this.
They do.
And some of this comes back to the middle film where, of course, Elizabeth makes a choice toward Jack that Will sees. He doesn't quite understand the context of it.
I love that so much.
It's great. And then she And it's interesting, right? Because what she tells Jack in the moment is, I'm not sorry, but immediately regrets it or
Well,
immediately feels the burden of it.
that is the most fascinating thing about Dead Man's Chest. I think the second half of Dead Man's Chest might be the best Pirates movie. It's really the first half getting to that where it's really like spinning its wheels from a plot mechanic standpoint.
Literally
and
spinning the wheels as they're like going.
I wasn't
down
even trying to do that, but you're right. That is a very good observation. A very good set piece, mind you. But yeah, you're
I
right. That
enjoyed
is
it.
what the
Yeah.
movie is actually doing. But
Yeah.
it gets to a really interesting moment regarding Elizabeth Swann. And here's this someone from high society that is finding herself kind of enamored by this pirate's life and sort of torn between both of those lifestyles. And that choice that she makes, it's all a red herring. You know, like she clearly doesn't have that kind of love and affection for Jack Sparrow as she says that she does. She's really just using him in many ways.
Well, and I think
that.
I think what's fascinating is, because what she claims in the moment is the Kraken is after you.
Yeah.
And therefore it allows us to escape. But that's not really what's going on, because earlier in the movie, she has the compass when they're trying to find the heart.
Yeah.
And when she opens it, it points to Jack Sparrow and not the heart. So she is clearly conflicted between Will and this life of piracy, as you're talking about. So when she chains him to the Black Pearl, she is hoping that this is her way of escape herself.
Yeah.
Not just from the Kraken, but emotionally. But then she starts to feel the burden of that. And that carries itself into At World's End, where Will, because Elizabeth isn't honest or transparent about any of this, he decides to take things into his own hands as it relates to his father. He schemes up this own plan of his own and doesn't bring Elizabeth into it. So even though they are together, there is a romance there. There is this interesting duality, though, that they are kind of in this for themselves simultaneously. Like they don't bring each other into it. So there is like a lack of trust or a lack of transparency.
Yeah.
Where they kind of have their own schemes going on without telling each other, which plays into what you're talking about in terms of a pirate's life and just being about themselves. That is those two characters as well. It's not just the pirates of these movies, but
it's not just about the sword swinging or the treasure
not
hunting.
just the swashbuckling, but it's the romance at the center of it that is also the pirate's code. That I think is really fascinating. And then all of that crystallizes in this incredible fashion at the end where they decide to get married in the middle of this fight, bring back Barbosa for this incredible ceremony. That is just blockbuster fun at its best. It's so good.
It's well shot and well made blockbuster fun. And that's the one thing that we need to talk about here, and why we're always referencing these movies in comparison to what blockbuster filming looks like nowadays, especially from Disney. Because these movies look amazing. They aged
do look
so
really
well. Let's look at the simple design and the effects work of Davy Jones. The tentacles. It's not even just the inventiveness and the creepiness of it. It's the color shading of it. It's the use of shadows, the three-dimensional space that it takes advantage of. It still looks very tangible. It looks like you can actually like dangle those tentacles if you really wanted to.
It's
good. Amazing. Yeah.
And I think one of the best examples of it is when Will is trying to get the key from under the tentacles.
Yeah.
And he's having to hold them up. He's got a little stick in his mouth and he's trying to kind of and you're right. There is a tangibility there that is really incredible, knowing that the character is CGI.
Yeah.
And yet when Will is somehow getting in there, it feels as if he's actually having to maneuver around these tentacles that exist in front of him.
Yeah.
Like it's an incredible effect that is really great, and we just don't really see all that much these days.
I know.
And it's wonderful.
There's a lot that Gore Verbinski fought for with regard to the visual effects and trying to keep them as realistic as possible. And I mentioned earlier that I did have a slight theory as to how these films got away with what they did. And I don't know all of the details, but from what I've heard, there was another project around the same time that Disney was really focused on, which allowed Gore Verbinski a lot more creative freedom than most other filmmakers of a property like this. And I think that's why we got to see, like children getting hanged in the beginning of At World's End.
Crazy.
I mean,
He was able to do that.
that is damn near close to R-rated territory just based on subject matter. It is.
Oh, I agree.
It is damn near close.
And singing that song, like it is genuinely bleak.
It is. And
haunting.
But this is what I love about Gore Verbinski as a filmmaker, is that he is willing to kind of gross you out. I mean, there are elements of his films that remind me of other filmmakers. I mean, we just spent a lot of time talking about Tim Burton, for instance, and there are certainly some Burton-esque things that he is influenced by. But a movie like Mouse Hunt, for instance, his first ever major film, which is a film marketed to kids and almost plays like a live-action Tom and Jerry cartoon, is also kind of a horror film, right? I mean, it's a gross movie. It's a very ugly and unpleasant movie at times, and I love it for those reasons.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was watching Curse of the Black Pearl on Friday night this past weekend, and that, I would say, of the three is probably the most close to horror that these films get. But yeah, I think like there's this incredible shot where the zombie pirates are walking under the water, and you see this lighting behind them that makes them almost come off like these shadows, but you see the skeletons just glisten under the water, and it's an incredibly evocative shot. And you know that it's primarily CGI, and somehow it is still incredibly redolent. And I was just sitting there going, how? Like 20 years later, we are literally 20 years later, this film just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And I don't know if there's not many blockbusters of this size that can do that these days.
It's a movie that if it were to come out this year, we would be begging for it to get a Best Visual Effects nomination at the Oscars.
Yeah, seriously.
Like, that's incredible.
Same effect. Yeah.
But
it truly is astounding.
But I love, like one of the things that we keep talking about so much with regard to why the film is so effective is not just what it's doing visually, but it's also what it's doing narratively. So I do want to give some credit to the writers here, Ted Elliott and Terry Russo. Stuart Beatty and Jay Wolpert, I think, are co-writers here in some way. I think they might just have story credits if I'm not mistaken. But, Ted Elliott and Terry Russo are certainly known for their swashbuckling antics, co-writing movies like Aladdin or The Mask of Zorro, for instance. But
makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, here, I don't know if the idea of the Pirates Code and the ambiguities of what defines heroes and villains was on the page. I think I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Gore Verbinski found those themes and just chose to heighten them in a certain way within this trilogy.
With the performances, which is a big part of it.
Well, that's another thing we need to talk about. I mean, say what you will about Johnny Depp as a person nowadays, but he gives a hell of a performance, a brave performance.
Memorable character. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we talked about someone like Paul Reubens and what he did with characters like Pee Wee Herman or the Spleen in Mystery Man. There's no one else who could do those roles. And the same could be said about Johnny Depp and Captain Jack Sparrow.
I agree. Say what you will about him as a person, and I am certainly not going to vouch for him at all. I am not his biggest fan outside of these movies, but I will have to agree with you. His performance in these films are genuinely incredible. And I love how he's able to play that faux bravado that Jack Sparrow has, this ego that he elicits constantly throughout this film when he's really just this weakling underneath who wants to run away at every turn. And how he balances that out and gives the character this incredible credence at times is just remarkable. I think about those scenes between him and Elizabeth and Dead Man's Chest, and there's some tension between the two actors there and the characters, and it often comes through not in dialogue, but simply how they look at each other, how they react to each other. But then there's the fun buffoonery of him in the first one. This is the day you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow, and he runs off. And, then, there's that moment of him in Davy Jones's locker. And as weird as it is, like, that's a scene that could fall on its face quite easily if not handled properly. But he does a great job of tapping into the psychology of the character. And
he lays a freaking egg. I mean,
he does. Yeah, no, it's wild.
I hate using the director's description. Like there are certain director's descriptions we try to avoid, right? It's like when we talked about Oppenheimer and we use the term Malikian. We sometimes try to avoid certain things, but I can't help but say that Davy Jones locker sequence is kind of Lynchian in many ways.
Sure.
But it's even if he were Verbinski specifically, even if he were copying David Lynch or at least inspired by him, the charm of that sequence is that it is being lumped into a Disney blockbuster. Like that is incredible. And yet it still feels of a piece with the movie. Like it doesn't feel like a weird sequence just for the director to get a little handsy with his filmmaking, right? Like it honestly kind of meshes with the entire nearly 3-hour film. Which again, tonal balancing act. Verbinski, whatever he's doing there, whatever the performances are doing to make that all work, the synergy there is quite perfect. I don't think At World's End is a perfect film. I think at nearly 3 hours, it is a little it's hard to watch pretty often, right? I mean, it can be a pretty insufferable film at times, but I love that it is. Like it really challenges you.
I have a ball with it. I watched all 3 hours in one sitting. Just at
I can still do that too, but like I don't think I could take another 5 minutes of it after. Once the end credits roll, I'm good. I'll say that.
Okay, fair enough. I guess I love the audacity of it, and those dueling components we talked about earlier, I think are daring in these films, and the performances are just absolutely incredible to me. So, and it's not just Johnny Depp. I mean, I talked about Jeffrey Rush. He's genuinely amazing. Orlando Bloom, Keira Knightley, very good. Bill Nighy as Davy Jones, come on, like just kills it.
Perfect.
So
He's great.
good.
He's wonderful.
All of these performances really go for it. And we sort of talked about this. When did we talk? Was this last week on the show? Yeah, because we were talking about Pacific Rim.
Yes.
I was talking about how the performances in that film kind of make it what it is, because so many blockbusters, you get these actors that are simply there for a paycheck, and they might do a fine job, but that's really all that it is. Sincerity is key. That was such a big thing for me with Pacific Rim, and I would label the at least this trilogy as the same thing. These are actors that aren't just here for a paycheck; they're delivering real performances that, again, tap into the fun and the comedy of it all, but also those dramatic through lines. And I think it all comes through incredibly well inside of Verbinski's direction and the craft that he brings here. I mean, this is a film, speaking of At World's End, where its budget was $300 million. We've just talked about a lot over the last few weeks about how absurd $300 million are for a lot of these movies across the board. But in 2003, that was very rare.
That was very rare.
This was
adjust that to inflation. That's a lot of money.
Exactly. That'd be like $500 million.
That's $500 million.
Yeah, that's James Cameron territory right there.
Yeah, but this at least looks like there's money on the page.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, you see the money on the screen with the visual effects, as we were talking about, and the CGI, which, as you somewhat joked about, but I don't think you're wrong. If this came out, the same movie came out today, it would be up for best visual effects.
Yeah.
And then, and not only that, but the cinematography on its own, like they're in real locations. You see the tangibility of that. You feel that, where if those movies are made today, they're on some sort of set in Hollywood or Atlanta or Toronto somewhere, and I'm sure that with these films, there's still some of that going on. But when you see them out at sea, like there's still a lot of do see them on actual places, on actual islands.
Yeah.
That comes through, and it certainly makes these films, I think, all the more resonant all these years later. Brendan, let's talk about some coffee, shall we?
World's best medicine. Adult's best medicine.
It is the world's best medicine. It is the only thing that gets me through each and every single day. I love this stuff. Not only does it provide the caffeine that you're searching for, but coffee is just, it hits different when the quality is there. You know what I mean?
It does. It really does. Lately, I feel like I've been, looking forward to my coffee, not because of the energy boost that it's known to provide. It's more so about the taste. Like if I have a good tasting coffee, it's almost like a stress reliever for me.
Yeah.
And it's more about the aroma and the craft and the artistry, the way the beans are processed. That's what matters to me more as I've gotten older, which is, I don't know, maybe it's just a sign of getting old at this point now that I learned to appreciate it in a different way.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Coffee Cult so special, because their coffee is specialty grade Arabica beans from over 50 countries around the world. And they their coffee is unique in the sense that they inspect them all. So they don't use beans that are a lesser grade than specialty grade. So if it has defects, if they're broken, they won't roast them.
Yeah.
And so the quality and the consistency is there. And I think what's interesting, like as a result, because you're talking about flavor and aroma and quality, what's interesting about that with high-end coffee is that like you can smell a coffee and it can have like these really fruity notes to them, or maybe they have like chocolatey notes. But when you add in the water and the bean is processed, the aroma and the flavor can almost be different at times.
Yeah.
So like it's interesting how the aroma will flip from one end to something.
Yeah.
Not
it evolves. It
completely
almost
different, but it
expands.
evolves.
It's so neat. Yeah.
It is fascinating in that regard, but that's why, specialty grade coffee is really great, and you should invest in, even if it's cheaper than, the brand stuff, I'll say vaguely, you'll buy at your grocery store. That's not very good.
Well, and unlike those brands, Coffee Cult, it's not product that's sitting on the shelf for weeks at a time.
Yes,
right.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They roast to order, so they don't, like, the coffee just isn't sitting around. They wait for your order to come in. That's when it's processed. That's when it is roasted. So when you receive your bag of coffee, you can know that it was roasted that week.
Yeah.
And you got it within a few days of it being roasted. So every bag is guaranteed to be fresh and exquisite and delicious. And they have all kinds of blends and single origins that you can try. They have a new Colombian IPE, it's called. Yeah. That is one of my favorites. It is so good. It has
Sounds
these
great.
Just robust fruity notes that it's almost like drinking dessert. Like, it's just so good.
And you can tell
to describe it.
You can tell just based on the smell instantaneously, right?
Yes.
I mean, like the second the bag that I had, the Sumatra, the second I opened that bag, it was different. The aroma was just different. And sometimes different can be a vague term, but this was certainly a better different.
Yeah.
A better kind of different when compared to some of
good.
those other brands that we certainly, we won't mention here. But the ones that you commonly see in every aisle in every coffee shop or grocery store.
Yeah. Definitely urge you to go and check them out. And you can try it you can get 15% off. So go get your coffee and you can get 15% off with our code, which is ISF. Again, that's ISF. Get 15% off. That's coffeecult.com. Coffee with a K, cult with a K. Coffeecult.com. The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you for the last time by our great friends over at First Time Watchers.
Try not to cry.
I know, Brendan, they finished up their show with episode 500 last week, and I will admit I got a little emotional listening to that episode as they reflected back on their 500 episodes. They talked a little bit about their history and what it was like conjuring up those first few episodes and how everything changed and evolved. And, they talked about some of the guests that they've had on over the years. And it was honestly touching to hear. I'm going to miss these guys a lot. They're very unique and weird and lovely. All three of them are just gems of people.
Yeah.
And
let's single them out. Walter, Tim, and Hermano.
Yes.
Yeah. These three co-hosts that we've been plugging all of these years, these film critic weirdos, as I think we need to call them, because they produce what I think is perhaps the most, or at least one of the most unique film podcasts out there.
Yeah.
I mean, not many film podcasters out there would choose to dedicate a full review, a full movie review to something like a Serbian film, right?
Yeah. Which they did twice because it was
not just once, but twice.
Twice. So they did it in a little bit of poetry here. They reviewed a Serbian film on episode 1. That in and of itself should tell you about these guys and how different they are.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they end the show on episode 500 by revisiting that film and talking about it one more time.
Yep.
With friend of the show, Mark Herney, who was a guest on the show. Love me some Mark.
Love Mark.
Give him a shout out. But really fun conversation. The review of it, I haven't seen the film, but based off of what they had to say, that sounds about right.
Oh, you will not like the film. I'll tell you that right now.
I know that I would hate it. Absolutely. I would loathe it based off of what they've had to say. But yeah, I mean, that middle section, when they were talking about the show and were reflecting, I legitimately started to tear up. I got quite sad that it was all ending. So
this partnership has existed for a decade.
Since the beginning.
Really.
I mean, Tim, Walter, and Hermano, for some context, we launched in February of 2013 and they launched in 2012. So they were fairly new, but they were there and were one of, the first people to reach out to us. Like Tim and Walter and Hermano, they were gracious and befriending us early on and helping us, start these cross promotions and They just been gems to us this entire time. So huge thank you to them once again.
Yep.
Definitely going to miss them. But they have an entire back catalog of films that you can go and see or listen to rather.
Yeah.
At firsttimewatchers.podbean.com.
Yep.
First spelled out, firsttimewatchers.podbean.com. Go and check them out. We love them.
We do.
We're going to miss them. They'll have to come back at some point, all three of them. I'd love to get them back here on the show.
Yeah, honestly, the table's open to add some more bodies to the main show. So if we want to have the first time watchers join us more frequently, we are not opposed to that whatsoever.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have to make that happen. But in the meantime, go check out their catalog. Again, firsttimewatchers.podbean.com. Go check them out. You're going to love them. First time watchers. Can we now please talk about the score? I've done my best to wait this long.
I was waiting.
It's been killing me.
I didn't want to have to be the one to introduce this topic, so I was just waiting for you to go ahead and have the floor.
Look, I tried really hard. I know. I was like, let's start with Jeffrey Rush. Let's talk about Verbinski and his direction, and we'll get to Johnny Depp and the performances. Like I tried really hard to wait. But now I just want to rave about these scores because, oh my God. And I know Hans Zimmer didn't do the score.
Did he though?
For
I mean,
Curse of the Black Pearl, but it's one of his guys. And he's on record of writing that main theme.
Yeah.
I think the only reason he didn't do it is because there was another film he was doing at the time. I can't remember the details.
I think you're right.
So Klaus Badal comes in to score that first movie, which is great still.
Yeah, it's great.
Like I don't know how much of it is technically Zimmer. It wouldn't surprise me if he did most of it still, but he's not credited. Either way, the score to Curse of the Black Pearl, that main theme that of course plays throughout the rest of them is an all-timer. It is one of the best musical cues I have ever heard. It's so much fun. It raises the hair on my arms each time. And I think one of my favorite elements of it. So, well, I guess let me backtrack a little bit, because the first time we kind of hear it is when the character of Jack Sparrow is introduced.
Yeah.
I think. I'm trying to recall. I just watched the film the other day. Anyway, one of the greatest character introductions we've seen when Jack walks.
Oh yeah, and the ship sinks. Yeah,
is it sinking? It's really great.
What a great sight gag.
It's wonderful. But maybe, actually, now that I'm thinking about it out loud, the first time we actually hear that main theme might be when, right after he rescues Elizabeth, and but they're gonna take him to jail. So he brings her close and puts a knife to her chest. And that's when he does today is the day you almost caught Jack Sparrow.
Yeah.
And then he runs off and he tries to escape. And that's when that theme kicks in. And watching it just a few days ago, I still get as giddy watching that as I did 20 years ago.
That's movie magic right there. That's blockbuster
so
movie magic. Yeah.
It's
but it's
so good.
It just goes to show the importance of a great movie score. And while musically, this score isn't doing the same thing as, say, a John Williams would, right? That doesn't change the fact that a movie like E.T., for instance, is also defined by that score. The movie is carried by that great score. And that's not a knock on E.T. because it's such a perfectly constructed movie in its own right. But the score helps connect all of those perfections together. Yes. Which is more or less what the scores for these movies are doing. I think all three scores are amazing because they almost feel like the movie almost functions like an opera or something, right? Like a ballet. Like it feels so intertwined and interconnected and so well choreographed to the music. It's just all perfectly constructed in that regard.
Well, a great movie score, especially in a blockbuster like Pirates of the Caribbean. But yeah, I think this goes across the board because you can say the same thing about dramas, sci-fi comedies, even. Like a really great score will connect you to what's happening on screen all the more. At least that's what it's doing in my case. And the score to these films brings such a fervent energy that is undeniable. So when these characters are making the choices they do, and we see them get in the action they're involved with, and that main theme kicks in, or all of the accompanying music, it's not just the main theme, you're so utterly engaged. I think that's why, again, going back to At World's End, despite it being 3 hours, I am utterly engrossed with what's happening because I love Barbossa. He's a lot of fun. There's the weirdness of it, as we talked about, and all of the shenanigans between all of the pirates. But connecting all of those things is this Hans Zimmer score that is so captivatingly fun that, by the time the movie starts to when it ends, I'm like, how did 3 hours just go by? Like, I just feel so like I'm such a part of the movie. And it's certainly the case with the first two as well. That it's just such a breathtaking part of the experience. And to the point where, and I mentioned this on Twitter during COVID because one of the first things I did when we all went into lockdown is I showed my son Sam these movies. He had never seen them before. Okay. And at that time, I probably hadn't seen them since maybe they came out, or maybe like 2006, 2007. I caught up with them. Maybe it'd been a while, been a long time.
Yeah.
So we went back to revisit them, and it has everything that we've been talking about. But the one thing that really stood out to me is the endings to those movies. When you talk about walking out of a theater with this feeling, whatever it may be, we talked about this with Oppenheimer. You walk out of the theater after watching Oppenheimer and you just feel dirty. Like that last line is so haunting, jarring, and it's just a movie that you have to linger with. Like it's so horrific.
You take it with you, right?
You take it with you.
Yeah.
And a great movie will have you feeling some sort of way when you walk out.
Yeah.
You know, Oppenheimer, it is kind of that bleak, cynical tone that no
Yeah.
one is going for.
Yeah.
Or in the case of Barbie, you walk out joyous because it's such a fun movie.
And yet you still take that with you. A very different feeling, but you take it with you. And you're
take
right.
it with you. With Pirates of the Caribbean, those films are quintessential in this way as well, because they end with some sort of fun little quip that is rooted in pirate lore. And as soon as that last line hits, that main theme kicks in and immediate chills.
It's like all about musical timing. Yeah.
Musical timing,
it's not
the
even just
editing
that.
of it.
Yeah, these movies end, all three of them narratively end in ways that kind of secretly challenge the audience, because that's kind of the thing we were talking about a lot with these movies, and how they sort of deconstruct the idea of heroes and villains and, you know, team up camaraderie and swashbucklers like this, the way that they're really more about the pirate's code than they are about the pirate's friendship.
Yeah.
And you leave these movies with that euphoria that we're talking about, but you kind of start to think more about it, and you realize that there's more complicated nature to all of these movies. And admittedly, you know, when I first saw Curse of the Black Pearl in 2003, I did see it when it first came out. I was not a big fan of it because I found myself a little too challenged by what it was doing. And I just didn't get it, you know, like the whole like back and forth between certain characters, the mistrust between them, the fact that we didn't really have a clear idea of who our heroes and who our villains were, like why they're fighting each other, even if they know that these zombie pirates can't be killed. Like all of those things I found myself like constantly thinking about as a kid. And then I realized that's all part of the point. And,
Yes.
and as you get older and you leave these movies with these feelings, it forces you to think about these movies more. And that's why like these aesthetic choices have merit and have purpose. They're not just there for flair. They're there to keep you engaged so you can find yourself thinking about these more complicated ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how Verbinski and his team is able to tap into all of that, because you know, you think of the end of Curse of the Black Pearl, and this is why creating a character like Jack Sparrow that is so engaging is important, because he's the last thing we see. If you don't care about the character, then this ending isn't going to be as impactful. The other thing that probably helps is being on the ride, because you've been on the ride and you hear a lot of the terminology that is sung there or that's said with these characters as you go throughout the ride.
Sure.
That is a part of it as well. And, or even the you know, the one of the, I forget the name of it, but like that main song that comes with the ride, because a lot of the dialogue from that is in the film itself. It's a part of this ending, right? You know, because, you know, we get to this final ending where Sparrow gets back to the Black Pearl and it's his ship again. It's the first time he's connected with it since the beginning of the movie. He's the captain of the Black Pearl again. So he's a character that we've come to enjoy, that we've come to love, and we want to see more of him. And he starts singing lyrics from the song that is a part of the Disney ride. So the last thing he says is, "Drink up, me hearties, yo-ho." So there's a little nostalgia there. But as soon as he says that, and this goes back to the timing of it all, and that euphoric feeling you feel, because as soon as he says that, that's when that theme kicks in, and it is just impeccable. And
it is.
I absolutely love it. It's just incredible. And then with Dead Man's Chest, I might like this one even more, because because, you know, the ending to this film, honestly, one of my favorites maybe ever. Not best. Let me be clear about that. It's not necessarily one of the best endings, but I love this, right? Because it's everything we talked about earlier. You get the tension between Will and Elizabeth. There's still some ambiguity there, but the idea comes up, like Jack Sparrow, who we had just witnessed been killed by this Kraken. The idea is proposed. What would you do to save him? And everyone there is like, yes, I am on board. What do we have to do? And she's like, well, if you're going to World's End, you're going to need a captain that knows those waters. and down comes this character. And at the time, we don't know who it is, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
you start
Nowadays,
to-
we would be able to predict it because we're so
Well, you would know
conditioned
it
to
now,
those
yeah.
twists, right?
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
But that first time, you don't know.
Yeah.
And you see the character walking down, and Zimmer is teasing that theme just a little bit, like it's starting to ramp up slowly. And then all of a sudden, Barbosa appears and says something to the effect of, he takes the bite of the apple and it's like, what's going on with my ship?
Yeah.
And then that's when that theme kicks
cuts
in.
to black.
It's just so good.
We often
So
criticize
good.
movies like, let's say Fast X, right? For just ending on a sheer cheap cliffhanger.
Yes.
But you can do it well. You can do
Yeah.
that thing well. Case in point, Dead Man's Chest, right?
Exactly. It is incredible. I love it so much. It's honestly one of the best parts of that movie. And it's literally the last scene.
Like I said, the whole back half of Dead Man's Chest, the second that Davy Jones himself is introduced, I think it might be the best Pirates movie of the three.
Yeah, sure.
Really, the whole wheel spinning analogy that we joked about some moments ago, like that's really the biggest problem in trying to find plot mechanics as opposed to character motivations to bring all these characters together for something, right?
Still fun to be had, but yes.
It's fun. It's not bad, but for a franchise or at least a trilogy, separating the trilogy from the actual other movies, for a trilogy that was more defined by this idea of the Pirates Code and the ambiguity of what these relationships were all about, I like that it was more about character motivations coming together and the selfishness of these characters as opposed to a plot that brought them back together, which is why I think comparatively the first half of Dead Man's Chest does feel like it feels like plotting as opposed to storytelling, right? And not bad plotting, but comparatively, I think there are definitely more wheels spinning, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, and understandably so, right? Because we come to find out there's a new, like Beckett is in charge of the Royal Navy now.
Yeah.
And so there's new characters, and therefore because he's in charge now, there's new motivations for the Royal Navy.
Yeah.
And immediately we see that Elizabeth and Will's marriage is disrupted because they're arrested.
Yeah.
And so that's where, to your point, like we're spinning the wheels awfully early, because we have to create new drama and new tension. We don't want to just simply regurgitate what we saw in the last movie. And so, it takes a little time kind of getting to that point, which I still enjoy. I think the film actually does.
Not bad. It's
really
well
good
constructed.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Knowing that it has to kind of create something new that isn't just the last movie, but it's also a continuation. Like, to be able to thread that needle, I think it does it well and has a lot of fun in it, even if it is more plot driven than character driven. But it eventually gets there, and so Dead Man's Chest still ends in an incredible way. Like, that whole third act, I think, is very good.
I agree.
And then you get to that ending that is a perfect cliffhanger to you.
And I still think all three of these movies are really good regardless. In fact, I'm honestly kind of surprised that all three of them, given the reputation that they have nowadays, I feel like they've only gotten better with time. I feel like they keep getting more appreciated with time. Because obviously there are many aggregators out there, review aggregators, whether it be Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic, whatever. Like you take that with a small grain of salt, right? That's not a defining attribute of how good a film is. It's a representation of what critics are reviewing the movie at the time.
Yeah.
But like, for instance, Dead Man's Chest on Metacritic has a 53 and At World's End has a solid 50. Like, those are technically defined by Metacritic as mixed reviews. I don't feel that way. It sounds like you don't feel that. I think they're way better than
much
that.
higher on the and also there's more critics on Rotten Tomatoes these days as well.
There are, there's more inclusivity, more different perspectives, as opposed to Metacritic trying to harvest the more well-known critics, regardless of what publication they write for, which is fine. It's a different perspective that's being, more tightly aggregated, but at the same time, you're right. Like, Rotten Tomatoes has offered and allowed more voices to add that perspective and really change things up.
Yeah. And while perhaps I don't know. I don't know if this is fair or unfair, but if Rotten Tomatoes said, let's do a do-over, and every critic on Rotten Tomatoes, you have to watch the Pirates of the Caribbean movies this weekend and review them and put them up for new scores. I do think, without question, especially in hindsight of the last 20 years and how those films function mechanically and maybe more importantly, visually, in the context of what we see today often within the Marvel machine and the Disney machine and the WB machine, where they just spit out just loads of CGI soup at a high cost, and a lot of it looks like complete and utter trash.
And lately, not as much return.
In the context of all of that, without question, these two films would be in the 70s probably on Rotten Tomatoes.
I would think they'd be in the 70s on Metacritic, which is a harder. Usually, you see higher scores on Rotten Tomatoes as opposed to Metacritic. But at the same time, though, I kind of like that they have the scores that they do, because it represents a snapshot in history as to what that perspective was, and it also gives us nowadays more credence to defend why they are so good, right? You know, like we don't need to replace these scores. Like that's not what the obvious agenda is. But at the same time, you're right. If we were to conduct this experiment, we probably would see a very different aggregation here.
Oh, they would be much higher.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No doubt about it. But that's the fun thing of history and hindsight and how things evolve and change. You know, because when these films came out, they probably were not the greatest thing that graced the cinemas in that given year. Although, Curse of the Black Pearl aside, I still argue that's one of the best.
That's a
10
top
movies
10
of
film.
that year.
Yeah, when we did our 2003 retrospective, we had a lot of blockbusters represented that year, didn't we? I mean, because we had that, we had The Return of the King, we had 2003. That was not the year of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. That was 2004. But it was still part of the same era. You know, the Harry Potter series had at least started. So we were still in the middle of a time when blockbuster films allowed filmmakers to make their own films and not IP films. And that's a major difference.
Yeah, I'm looking at my list now. When you posed this earlier, I wasn't entirely sure. I have Return of the King at 8, which I love. The Curse of the Black Pearl, I have at 5. I have it that high.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of why that was. I mean, I think we talked about that because we both had Curse of the Black Pearl slightly higher than Return of the King, and maybe it was more our acknowledgement that Curse of the Black Pearl is a more standalone film as opposed to Return of the King really functioning as like a third act of a single movie in many ways, that doesn't lessen the movie itself, but when you're trying to compare it to other movies that function in their own way of a piece within themselves, it becomes a completely different comparison then.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. They are somewhat difficult to compare in that regard. Yeah, because Return of the King really is functioning as the third part of a whole. And if you want to criticize it for having, 27 different endings, you can. I still love that film.
I don't mind that.
I don't mind it as much either. It's in my top 10 of that year, so I clearly still love it. I just think there's something about the magic of The Curse of the Black Pearl that Disney and really many modern blockbusters just simply haven't been able to recapture.
I agree.
And it is kind of insane, right? Because it's based off nothing. It's based off of a ride.
Yeah.
It has no narrative to it, no story. Like the writers here simply conjure up general pirate lore, create specific characters that can function within that realm, and then just have a ball playing with those tropes.
Yeah.
And then Verbinski gets the set and says, okay, here's all the pirate lore that we're tapping into. Here are the tropes. We're going to have as much fun with this as possible, but we're not going to do it at the behest of craft. We are also going to do this well.
Yeah. Well,
That makes a big difference.
And I do want to talk a little bit more about Gore Verbinski before we close out this conversation, because when you look at his 10 films that he has directed, it's a pretty hit or miss filmography, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But they all look, from a visual standpoint, really interesting, right?
Yes.
Like there's at least an attempt at craft, even despite the misses like Lone Ranger, right? Which is still Lone Ranger's
love the last
bookend.
20 minutes though.
Well, even the opening of Lone Ranger is not that bad either, right? It opens up pretty excitingly. But yeah, the last 20 minutes is perhaps the greatest action short film of all time. I mean, it's practically on the same level as Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, just in a more modern lens.
Yeah.
But with most of Gore Verbinski's films, they have a visual flair that looks like artistry, even if the movies aren't great. And I'm not sure what your like spontaneous ranking of Gore Verbinski's films are, if you've even seen them all. But those that are actually among his best work are really good films, which, include Curse of the Black Pearl and At World's End. Those are actually my two favorites, with Mouse Hunt as my third favorite.
Wow. Okay.
Which I think is a pretty awesome movie. Even Rango. I think Rango is a really awesome animated movie too.
Rango is very good. I was going to say that might be in my top 3. Curse of the Black Pearl is certainly my favorite.
Same.
I'm also a big defender of A Cure for Wellness.
That's my number 5.
Movie.
That's my number. But I'd say out of his 10 movies, there are 6 that I really do like. And those are the 3 Pirates movies, Mouse Hunt, Rango, and A Cure for Wellness. I think those are all genuinely really good movies, for what they're doing, right? They're very interesting movies, at least.
Yeah, off the cuff here, I'd say Curse of the Black Pearl, At World's End, A Cure for Wellness,
Okay.
Rango,
Okay.
Dead Man's Chest,
Mm-hmm.
the last 20 minutes of The Lone Ranger.
We have to have a separate category for the last
separate.
20 minutes of
I'm
The Lone
sorry,
Ranger.
like
we really
most
do.
of that movie is abysmal, but that last 20 minutes is genuinely. It's like Gore Verbinski finally showed up to say, "Oh, thank God you're here."
Yeah.
We need you to direct this movie, and then he did the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, and I do at least want to acknowledge that there are aspects of The Ring, the film with Naomi Watts, that are at least very effective. I think that's a movie that gets bogged down by its procedural storytelling. Ewan Kruger, I think, was the writer of that film, if I'm not mistaken. And I think the script sometimes bogs it down just a little bit. But when Gore Verbinski comes to play as a horror director, I think that film is really interesting. I just wish there was more of it, which is why it's a little bit lesser for me. And even a weird little dramedy like The Weatherman, which is probably the least Verbinski, the least gory of all of these films.
The fact that he directed that one is, I want a documentary on that. Like, how did he get connected with that movie? Like, that doesn't scream Verbinski at all.
that kind of falls into the same category as to why I think a movie like Christopher Nolan's Insomnia is probably one of his lesser movies, because it doesn't have enough of the gorisms, the goriness to really say that it's one of his movies. It feels kind of like a director for hire, but at the same time, it's still a charming movie.
Yeah,
and I do like Nicolas
it,
Cage,
especially because of Cage. Yeah,
absolutely.
100%. Yeah. Cage saves that one for sure. But yeah, I mean, I like The Ring. Mouse Hunt, you like much higher than I do. I do like
nostalgic film for me. That was another childhood film of mine, which, watching it now, it probably should not have been, because that is a really grotesque movie. But I respect it for those reasons, and I still like it for a lot of those reasons. So yeah, chalk it up to Blinders, I guess. But I still think it's really interesting.
But I do agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just don't have the nostalgic factor with that one, but
sure,
I would certainly rank it above The Ring. I can say that for sure. And if we're being technical, I would rank it above The Lone Ranger as well, obviously.
Yes, yeah.
And The Weatherman, but that last 20 minutes of The Lone Ranger, all joking aside, I'm forever going to separate those two things because they're two different movies.
I often thought about that, like thinking about, why does the last 20 minutes work so well when everything else before it really doesn't. Because you would think if a movie's ending or climactic battle works, it's because everything leading up to it did the work to earn that, right? Like that's usually our way of thinking. So I tried testing that some years ago, thinking, is the movie actually working as to why the ending actually works? And it's like, nope, the ending's just a short film. It's its own separate thing. Everything else before it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think part of it as well, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the score, because Hans Zimmer comes back to score this movie as well.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about that track that plays at the end, which is primarily not his original work, right? It's the Willem Tell Overture.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly.
Exact.
Primarily that, but he updates it it's very Hans Zimmer-esque.
Yeah.
You know, he does it within his own flavor, to make it distinct in his own.
Yep.
And so I think there's a lot of fun just to be had in that. However, the one thing about that track as well is that it's not exclusively the William Tell Overture. There's also this main theme that he comprises for the movie that plays throughout, that he also kind of that he somehow seamlessly blends into the overture.
Yeah.
So like as you get to the peaks and valleys of the overture, we hear this main theme that he had comprised that played by itself earlier also bleed in. And so it becomes like this amalgamation of Hans Zimmer channeling something that was there before, but also this new thing. And there's something about the bleeding of those two things that I
past
think
and
is
future.
really fun.
It's really interesting.
I think speaks to that whole sequence and how effective it is. So, Hans Zimmer, I just think doesn't I think he has reached the level of mainstream that people just want to harp on him because he's so popular.
Oh, it's why
it drives me nuts.
These
Absolutely
stupid
drives me crazy.
Ludwig Göransson comparisons and him working with Nolan. I saw one tweet that I just had to comment on.
I saw it. Yeah, thankfully. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, it's like I doubt that Zimmer is effing embarrassed about the fact that he didn't score Oppenheimer. Like, I doubt that because he not only has at least 3 classic scores with Christopher Nolan, but look at the work that he has done since then, or even in the middle of all of that. So
it's funny how quiet those same people were when Tenet came out, and people were talking about Ludwig's score as a Zimmer knockoff.
Yeah,
those where were you guys then? Because nobody was talking about his score for Tenet, and if they were, you couldn't separate Zimmer's influence from his score for Tenet.
That's right, yeah.
So I just find it all incredibly myopic and again, quite obtuse. I was very vocal about that last week when we were talking about that, or whenever, I guess it was on the Oppenheimer review that we did. But yeah, Zimmer just doesn't get enough credit. He creates a lot of themes and a lot of scores that have become popularized. Yeah. And with anything popular, like there was a tweet I saw earlier tonight. I wanted to retweet it, but I honestly ran out of time. But it was it was this tweet. It was actually a meme, fittingly of Ryan Gosling, I think from Blade Runner. But over top of him was, in quotes, F the MCU. And then right underneath that was this little caveat that said, but seeing the next one anyway. Just like, it was so perfect because
points to the hypocrisy of all these things.
That is film discourse and film Twitter in a nutshell. Like you get on social media and you're like, screw this. And then you just go and see whatever the next thing is anyway. It's just like...
I feel like even, like we live in this. We're all even filled up with hypocrisy. Like I'll be on Twitter. I hate film Twitter. It's like, oh, what are you doing? I'm on film Twitter.
I'm on film Twitter. Yeah. It's such a deep love-hate relationship. And I bring up Marvel to say, because I feel like Marvel is another example of this, but Nolan, I think, was even a victim of this 10 years ago. Any director or any artist, you get to a point. I honestly, I think part of RDJ's backlash is this as well. He's a popular figure. He was in the MCU for a decade, and people they don't want to. They're afraid to admit to the RDJ hype because let's talk about someone else for a change. You know, despite that he's genuinely great in that film.
Yeah.
And he's an important figure as to why that movie works as it does.
Yep.
It doesn't mean he has to win Oscars, but he's great in that film. We can have separate conversations about that.
He'd be great in that film, but not have to prove a point, right? Like
exactly.
It could be
but you know,
thing.
You reach a level of stardom where, for whatever reason, and we're in the film space, so I speak to film, but honestly, I think this translates to a lot of forms of art. You become popular, and immediately people want to tear you down.
Oh yeah, you become popular, then all of a sudden there's a target on your back.
And there's a target, and people want to tear you down. In some cases, it might be warranted, but in most cases, it just feels, I don't know. Like, to me, it's such a weird thing when it comes to, you know, like mainstream culture. I personally don't connect with it. I've never understood that mentality. I truly cannot wrap my head around it. I've never in my life seen something popular and go, you know what? My next thought, I'm gonna go after this thing. Like, I don't have that type of energy or time for any of that. I don't care.
I don't want to speak for other people, obviously, but I think there is a deep-rooted insecurity in the way that those actions are presented, at least from some of those people. But again, I feel like that might be a bit harsh. I don't want to get too deep into that because obviously we're not psychologists, right? Like, we don't know the people that are doing this. But at the same time, I kind of wonder if that is the case because you and I are people that are able to, and not everyone needs to do this because certain artists are difficult, to say the least, to separate the person from the art, right? And sometimes we can't do that. But you and I are usually pretty good at doing that at the very least. And I think that certainly helps in allowing us to position those artists, those performers, directors, whoever it is, and just judge them in a very particular vacuum for the work that they're doing that we're watching on screen. And that's all it takes at that point.
Yeah, and perhaps there's certainly more to it as you're suggesting there.
Yeah.
I don't really know, but it's something that I've never been able to wrap my mind around. I just don't have the energy. I don't care. And part of it just might be I try not to engage in cynicism, generally speaking. Like, you know, like
That's no fun. Movies are supposed to be fun and good.
Well, and here's the thing, like, when it comes to art, yes, be as hopeful or as cynical as you want. I can watch both ends of that extreme. We just talked about Oppenheimer. It's one of my favorite Nolans. It's one of the best films of the year. Or I can watch something hopeful like Dunkirk, which is a whole nother. We didn't really talk about this in the Oppenheimer thing, but I do love that Nolan ended up making two movies that take place around World War II. One of them is this hopeful, poetic narrative around this event at Dunkirk, and it becomes this poignant image of togetherness and bravery and unity. And then
bravery from the ordinary people that we don't really know. Yeah,
exactly. The idea that good things can come out of war. War itself might be horrible, but the choices and the bravery that people make inside of war, whether it be soldiers or in the case of Dunkirk, civilians as well, we can do this together. And it becomes this hopeful message. And then Oppenheimer is the antithesis to that. It is the most cynical thing Nolan has ever done.
Yeah.
And it's not even close.
Yeah.
So I love all of that. But that is to say, like, when it comes to art, I will take whatever you want to give to me. But when it comes to being on social media and being in conversation, like, I just sway away from cynicism and negativity as much as I can because that level of stress I just don't need or want. I mean, we can have conversations around those movies. That's different. But to just evoke negative energy all the time and screaming about the things that you hate and things that you want to tear down, like, I mean, be you. If that's your thing,
if that's your thing and you have a reason for it, that's
it.
fine. But yeah, I'm kind of with you that if I have things like that I want to say, I'd rather say it vocally or in person as to, properly project the feelings that I want to be projected as opposed to being masked by a digital cloud, right? And that's what I don't like about it. And I feel like it becomes easier to vocalize things in a certain way when you do have that kind of digital mask to kind of work with. And it becomes dangerous.
I think the anonymity of it all, I think, certainly plays into it. But there is a big difference, and I want to be crystal clear on this. There's a difference between having a conversation and offering legit criticism.
Yeah.
We can have a conversation. We can offer up genuine criticism. But when people just get online and they scream and they shout and all they want to do is hate and point their fingers and tear down something that's popular, that's not criticism. That's you getting online and screaming to the heavens that you don't like something because it's popular. That's not the same thing. And that level of fakery is just not something that I am in tune with. I can't wrap my head around it, but I've seen so much of that around Hans Zimmer lately that there's sadly
an audience for it though, which is even scarier when you think about it.
So, anyway, that's a side tangent to say that I think what
nice therapy session here on the InSession Film Podcast.
I just think it's a little underrated. The same thing with what he does in Ron Howard's Rush. Like that's another vastly underrated.
That's a great score. That's a great score.
It's so good, and he just doesn't get enough credit for his work there because it's not Dune or it's not Christopher Nolan and or whatever. Like there's more. He's been acclaimed further with some of these other projects, but I think he's demonstrated his prowess in things like The Lone Ranger and Rush as well. That I just think deserves a little bit more love. Anyway,
I'm with you. Yeah, Hans Zimmer.
Long way to say
Good at his job.
Good at his job. All right, I think as we wind down here, we don't have to spend too much time on this, but I did want to note, because the last few weeks we have talked about Barbenheimer. We've talked about the state of cinema and what Barbie and Oppenheimer means in the context of where Hollywood stands right now. Last week we talked about its box office results and what it means in context of the strike even and moving forward. What are the lessons going to be for Hollywood? Well, the other aspect of that, Brennan, I brought up this idea that Barbenheimer might dominate the box office for quite a while.
Well,
because
you're already a weekend into it, so you're on track so far.
The second weekend saw a 43% drop for Barbie and a 44% drop for Oppenheimer, which I believe are record lows. It maybe for July. I'm not sure on what the criteria is around those records, but I did see that out there. Either way, no matter how you slice it, those are incredible numbers. Yeah. Absolutely incredible. So Barbie is upwards of $750 million worldwide. Oppenheimer around $400 million worldwide.
Barbie's going to be the first billion-dollar cult classic, as some people are putting it.
Amazing how those cult classics could just become billionaires.
I know. Yeah, you could be a nobody into somebody in just a matter of weeks.
Amazing. But yeah, I mean, and then this weekend you get the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated film and the Meg 2. I don't know. I mean, they're obviously going to drop a little bit, but is the drop going to be enough that the Meg 2 and Turtles beats them? I don't know.
This is my guess. I think we can rule the Meg 2 out. For some reason, I just don't know if that's going to have those kind of legs for at least a box office win over the weekend. I weirdly think it's going to still be Barbie at number 1 with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles just below that.
Okay.
With Oppenheimer then in third place. That's, again, it's a hunch. I'm merely basing this off of a hunch. I don't have any evidence or any financial extrapolation or forecasting to, predict that. It's just based on a hunch at this point right now.
Okay. So here's what I'm reading. As you were talking there, I did look this up. This is a projection, but the projection for the Meg 2 is somewhere between $70 million and $100 million. And that's more than I somewhat anticipated with that.
I don't know who's getting those numbers, but maybe I'm just not seeing enough of the word of mouth for this movie. Maybe I'm just too distant from the conversation, which is then more on me. But I mean, am I missing something? Because I thought this movie was going to bomb, honestly.
Okay, I think maybe if you separate, because what they're talking about here is how it's a well-positioned, as far as we're getting to the final weeks of the summer movie season. You know, you're a couple of weeks removed from Barbenheimer, and you're 2 weeks out from something like Blue Beetle. So it sits nicely, and your only other your other rival is an animated movie. So you have some counter programming going on here. Unless you're my son, who is interested in Meg 2 for some reason.
Okay, maybe it is having some legs there.
No, but to your point, I haven't seen anyone talk about this movie outside of a few individuals here and there. I don't know how much buzz there is for this. You know, I would say that it's not going to be anywhere near that 70 million.
I don't think it is. I really don't.
Wrong.
And I think a lot of that is us, kind of relishing or, experiencing the moment that is Barbenheimer, right? Because you mentioned that this is coming out at a pretty prime weekend, being a few weeks removed from Barbenheimer. But given the success of this unofficial marketing campaign, a few weeks removed from it really isn't that long. I think the talk around Barbenheimer as an event, as a thing, as a movement is still kind of top of mind. And I again, whether this would have happened or not, I don't know. Just it's really by accident, as we talked about last week. Yeah. But I think that by accident mentality is going to still give both of those movies some legs over something like the Meg 2.
I agree. I mean, the Meg 2 might surprise. It might do.
I think it'll do well enough to at least make its, from a budgetary standpoint, I think it'll at least do well for its own financial gain. But I don't think it's necessarily going to beat the other movies that are still being talked about.
Yeah, I still anticipate Barbenheimer kind of being top there. And then with August 11th, there's not much coming out that will compete with Barbenheimer there either. And Blue Beetle, who knows? Right now they're doing
that's an enigma.
No
that movie's such an enigma right now.
Well, it's interesting. It's supposed to be this pivot point. It's the beginning of the DCU, supposedly. But there's been little chatter about it, unfortunately. Again, I don't want this film to fail. I don't want DC to fail or James Gunn to fail. Yeah. I'm not pro Marvel or DC or an anti the other. I'd love for all of it to succeed. I want Hollywood to succeed. I want cinema to thrive. I don't know if we need a plethora of superhero movies. I want more Barbenheimers, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
And, right now, Blue Beetle, there's no marketing. They can't promote this movie right now. So it's all coming down to word of mouth. I don't know if it's going to do well. I mean, Barbenheimer might just dominate all of August.
I think I think it might. I honestly think it might. And it's funny because a few weeks ago, I predicted that Blue Beetle could potentially be the DC film that actually pulls in the best numbers this year. But now I don't think that's the case. But I think a lot of that is due to unfortunate circumstances. The lack of being able to promote it. So there is the unfortunate reality there. But I mean, you're right. It's a slightly newer property. It kind of has almost like this potential Iron Man idea that it's within an existing and well-known comics property, but it's a character we've never really seen. In fact, I don't think we've ever seen on the big screen. So there's room to play with there. And I guess I thought that audiences would really go for that. But I think if marketed properly, they would have gone for that. And sadly, due to those circumstances, we just couldn't take advantage of that. unfortunately.
Yeah, so as far as box office goes, it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens. Barbie is very likely going to cross that $1 billion mark this
Absolutely.
weekend.
Yeah.
Oppenheimer will cross 500 million. It's wild, the successes of those movies. And then we also got this report last week that Mattel's like, we're doing all of these movies. Now, one of the movies that was listed was Barney, and that's something that they had talked about actually a few months ago before Barbie even came out.
With Daniel Kaluuya, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Which is interesting to me because Kaluuya is a great actor, but then he's also described this movie as being Charlie Kaufman inspired. Okay, you have my interest.
I don't. Yeah,
this is going to be
you
a
at least
Charlie
have my
Kaufman-esque-
curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what that means. So, because last week we talked about how Mattel's going to take all the wrong lessons from this, and they're going to push this new universe. And this report comes out that here's the slate of everything that is currently in production, that we are currently working on. And I had somewhat forgotten about the Barney thing when we were talking about that last week.
Sure.
And that to me is interesting. It's certainly spurred on a lot of fun jokes that Uno is going to be this dark tale that's inspired by David Lynch or whatever.
Yeah.
And look, if that's how Mattel is going to treat this, damn the memes, I'm all in. Like, that's at least
what I would be
expecting.
Commit to it. Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Commit to
it,
that idea.
Because a Charlie Kaufman-esque Barney movie, I think, is kind of fascinating.
Sure.
Especially given how Kaluuya has, described that movie and what it's going to be about. I am genuinely interested in what that could look like. And if that hits, if they deliver on those promises and it becomes this successful thing, I don't know. Maybe there is something to this weird universe that Mattel is trying to build.
Well, as long as they commit to that specific agenda, right? Or that specific approach, right? That these movies have their own like weird director, auteur like influences, right? Because eventually when you start to see successes and those successes become very consistent, then that's when the oversaturation and the lack of creative effort begins, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I think Mattel taking the success of Barbie and saying, we're going to make our own cinematic universe, on paper, that sounds like they're learning the wrong lesson to me. Which is where it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I like the idea of what they're describing as Barney, but are they going to commit to it? Really, the best thing that could be learned from this are competing studios, finding creative ways to work together for a particular weekend, right? They don't have to create a marketing campaign like Barbenheimer, although I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to recreate that thing and then it becomes an even bigger like problem. There might be like a marketing cinematic universe, right? Which I wouldn't be surprised if that ended up being a thing. But it's more about finding those commonalities, putting maybe certain movies out in the same weekend that could compete with each other and get word of mouth, and allowing audiences like us to inadvertently, without asking, to participate in the marketing in some ways.
Yeah.
And like I said, it doesn't have to be that way every time, but that's what made Barbenheimer such a success. It's not the fact that a movie that is successful is going to spawn a cinematic universe.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way. That we've seen that so many times.
No, we talked about this a little bit last week. Barbie is not the reason that the film is successful.
It's part of it. I mean, it's a big part of it, but at the same time, there's more to it than that.
Well, I would actually push back against that. Barbie is a big brand, but the film is not successful because of the brand. No one would have went to see Barbie if it wasn't Greta Gerwig and her creative mind rendering these visuals the way that it is. And if it's not Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling.
I agree with. It's not it's not the brand, but the movie itself. And
the movie
talent.
itself. It's the talent and the team around Barbie, the cast, the set design,
that I
everyone
agree
within the production, which, you know, I guess when we mention Greta Gerwig, she's kind of the ringleader of it also. You know, it's Greta Gerwig. She's the reason that we were all excited. We loved Little Women. We loved Lady Bird. She's doing this Barbie movie that stars an actual Barbie and Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling as Ken. Oh my gosh, isn't this going to be fun? That's what started Barbenheimer. It was the grassroots social media. We are excited for this because an auteur is behind the camera, and this cast is excellent. Same thing with Nolan. Nolan is doing an Oppenheimer movie. I don't know what an Oppenheimer is, but it's Christopher Nolan, and oh my God, look at this cast. That's where it starts. And I don't think it has anything to do with marketing budgets or how much, you know, they were willing to spend to, you know, get commercials made or whatever marketing they were wanting to do. Although the marketing team for Barbie especially was very good. I don't want to undermine that. They did a lot of great things.
Yeah. I was just going to say,
amplify, you know, getting the word out there. But here's the thing about the marketing for Barbie. The marketing for that movie is, again, it's not what got people in the seats to see that movie.
Yeah.
What the marketing for Barbie did was amplify a movement that was already in existence.
Yeah.
Because this grassroots social media conversation started months before the movie. And again, it all circled down to Greta Gerwig and what we were excited for with this team. All they had the marketing team, all they had to do was release a photo, and it spread like wildfire.
Well, you're onto something there, because the teaser for Barbie did very well as far as getting interest. And then this movement, this grassroots marketing campaign sort of started to grow a bit. And the actual trailer, the main trailer for Barbie, kind of captured that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
One of the things it called out from director Greta Gerwig, it also called out this really clever tagline: "If you love Barbie, this movie's for you. If you hate Barbie, this movie's for you." So in some ways, it's like, this is, I think, where the brilliance of the marketing of Barbie really comes into play, because while it didn't necessarily create this grassroots campaign, it seemed to recognize it. Like, from a strategic marketing standpoint, it definitely recognized that trend and kind of toyed with it a little bit. At least it feels like it did, which is where the brilliance of that marketing campaign was.
Absolutely. And I think part of the brilliance, or really the main thing for me, again, is that it amplified a movement that was already there. An auteur is making this Barbie movie, and on the other side of the street is Christopher Nolan making a Christopher Nolan movie. And so we're very excited for both things.
Yeah.
And I think part of the success here, again, or maybe I was going to say all of this success, but again, I don't want to undermine the marketing.
No, I get you. Yeah.
However, I think the majority of the success, again, is rooted in this grassroots, to the point where, and I was having a conversation with my brother about this the other day because I thought this was really interesting. What was fun about Barbenheimer is that there was talk of, we're going to go see both movies in the same day. We're going to dress up. We're going to Barbie, and then we're going to the theater across the hall, and we're going to see Oppenheimer next.
Yeah.
And because so many people were doing this, the conversation, the grassroots of it all was,
it was about the double feature. It was about the double feature. Yeah.
Both on the same day. And we're dressing up, and we're taking selfies in our pink costumes. And then we're taking selfie in our Oppenheimer costumes. A lot of people blended the two. Like there was pink on one side and like black and white on the other, or whatever it is. Like, the fashion behind Barbenheimer was incredible. And I say all that to say, how many people do you think went to see Oppenheimer not because it's Christopher Nolan, not that it's this 3-hour movie about a scientist from 1945 that many younger people especially probably have never heard of before? How many people do you think went to see Oppenheimer because they wanted to go see Oppenheimer? Whereas they went to see it because of the Barbenheimer experience.
That was definitely a huge part of it. At the same time, though, I do think the marketing for Oppenheimer was really clever as well. Like, there are definitely people that found interest in Oppenheimer because of the marketed grandness of that movie, the IMAX experience of that, the whole talk about the recreation of the atomic bomb and how it was filmed on screen. Like, that was that was part of the conversation, but to your point, that wasn't the only part of the conversation. Like, that's not the sole reason that people went to go and see Oppenheimer. Like, it was the unofficial pairing of that movie.
It was the
with
Barbenheimer
Barbie.
of it all. It was the grassroots. This is what we're doing, everybody. We're going to see Barbie, and then we're going to see Oppenheimer. We're going to do it back to back on the same day. And I think there were a lot of participants for Oppenheimer that were there because they wanted to be a part of it. Like, they just wanted to be part of it.
They went
experience.
to see Barbie, or maybe it was sold out and all they can do is see Oppenheimer, so they went and saw that first.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some on the other side of that coin as well. Like,
yeah,
some husbands that only wanted to go see Oppenheimer, but they went to see Barbie as well because of the experience. And I'm not necessarily, I shouldn't necessarily say it sarcastically as to pinpoint
I
people
get what you mean.
in a certain light, but there might have just been Nolan fans that just wanted to see Oppenheimer. But you know what? It's Barbenheimer. I'll go see Barbie too.
Yeah.
Or there's the younger generation who isn't as familiar with Nolan. That maybe they just wanted to see Barbie, but I want to participate in this, so I'll go see both. And so the numbers of both of these films are amplified because of that conversation. The marketing amplified it.
It did.
But the heart of it was that grassroots campaign. And I just find that really fascinating. And that is just something that I don't think you can recreate. It's just not going to happen.
You know what I think is going to happen after this, though? I think the Criterion Collection is going to get both these movies and release it in a box set.
Well, that'd be fun. I think that would be
called the
really
Barbenheimer
fun.
set.
Yeah. And again, to your point about Nolan and the filmmaking, because my counterpoint to that would be, you're right. All of that is great. And to us cinephiles who care about that stuff, it's only going to get us excited. But the 24-year-old down the street who doesn't really give a crap about any of that, not going to influence him or her one way or another.
Yeah,
Barbenheimer did, though. That
definitely did. I often wonder about that, though, because Christopher Nolan is still one of those directors that does get at least some box office hits because of his name being on the marketing.
Yeah, he makes big movies.
But at the same time, like, where does that demographic end? Right? And it's
an interesting question.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, but to your point, the 24-year-old down the street, does that individual recognize the Christopher Nolan of it all? Do they see that name and automatically think, "Oh, didn't that guy make one of the greatest superhero movies of all time? I think I need to see this."
Yeah.
I mean, even a movie like Inception was such a hit, but then again, that was so closely tied to the Dark Knight trilogy that it's almost unfair to say that film worked and Oppenheimer worked because of that. It's not really a fair comparison, but Nolan still has some, box office cachet, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And I think that is important, the name aspect of it, because, and again, I apologize if my comment about the 24-year-old came off a little bit crass. I'm not trying to paint anyone in a certain light, because that 24-year-old down the street could easily be my brother who's just a few years younger than me, or my parents even, because if I was to talk to my family about, hey, Christopher Nolan filmed this in 70 millimeter, and if you go see it in IMAX, it's this incredible experience.
They probably respond. They probably respond by saying, "What's a Nolan?"
I don't know what you're talking about. Now, my brother will recognize the name Christopher Nolan. He knows the name. But if I talk to him about camera techniques and he shot on 70 millimeter and here's what it is on IMAX and sound design and here's the score, like, he doesn't care about any of that. And I would imagine a lot of the general public, they might be interested, pseudo-interested, or maybe not interested at all in any of that. Like, us as cinephile film nerds, we love that stuff. We eat it up. all day long. Here's the camera lenses he used. The general public doesn't care, but they do know Christopher Nolan. He makes big movies. I don't know anything about an Oppenheimer, but it's part of the Barbenheimer thing. I'm going to go see it.
I'm going to go see it.
And I think that's what drove this more than anything else. As great as the marketing was for Barbie, and it was very good.
Is this the third week in a row that we've dissected Barbenheimer?
Well, look, it's going to continue to dominate.
I was going to say,
office,
are we just going to turn this into an unofficial Barbenheimer podcast for the summer?
I should just title this show Barbenheimer Part 3. It
really is, yeah. And Part 4 is coming.
Yeah. At any rate, I guess we can go ahead and wind down. We are going a little long here, so we will close out the show for this week. Just want to say a big thank you to all of our patrons. We cannot do this without you. Your support goes a very long way. We noted on social media, though, starting this week, we are doing something weekly, exclusive content for our patrons that you can go and see at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. You can sign up for as low as $1 a month. You get access to all of this bonus content. There are other tiers there that have more rewards if you want to check that out. But we will have exclusive Patreon content every week. At least that is the plan. Yep. And by the time this episode goes live, that should already be available. So again, you can find that at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. And speaking of Patreon, we have Patreon bonus content up as well from this last week, where myself and Richard Newby, we got together to talk about Marvel's Secret Invasion. And spoiler alert, we did not have good things to say. It was we were not happy with that
I have
show.
not seen a single episode yet. And now I feel like I'm not even missing out, but I feel like I need to watch it to prep for the Marvels.
I do think you should watch it. If you're invested this far and you plan on seeing the Marvels, I do think you should watch it. And here's the one thing, and I've talked about this a lot. I do not live in a world of extremes, at least not all the time. Sometimes
it's worth being extreme about.
Yeah, Oppenheimer, masterpiece.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's warranted. But typically I don't live in the world of extremes. And as bad as Secret Invasion is, there are good things there. I think that's where my frustration lies, is that it could have been a really good show if it emphasized more of the good things and less of the bad things. Because when it's great, it's really, really good. Unfortunately, it's far and few in between. But there are some good things there.
Dang it.
At any rate, patreon.com/InSessionFilm. We have some bonus content there. Secret Invasion. Podcast reviews. Barbie and Oppenheimer. Obviously, we have that available. Brendan and I are going to get together soon. I think we're going to do a review of Carmen. Yeah. Starring Paul Mescal.
Yep. And Melissa Barrera. Let's not forget her.
Barrera. Yeah, of course. Scream 6. Go Scream 6.
Yep. Oh, she's so good in that. So good in that.
And what else? They Clone Tyrone.
Yes.
Netflix. I think those are going to be the two. So stay tuned for that. Women in Session will have something upcoming soon as well. I don't have it up in front of me, but stay tuned. Women in Session, actually, they have a Barbenheimer episode that came out last week.
Yep.
So definitely go and check that out. Be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that fun jazz.
Yep.
Email us, InSessionFilm@gmail.com. I think that's everything. Brendan, anything before we get out of here?
Looking forward to Barbenheimer Part 4 next week, because at the rate we're going, we're going to have more Barbenheimer to talk about, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we probably will have a lot of Barbenheimer to talk about.
Yeah.
Should be fun. It's going to dominate all of August, most likely. So by the time it's all said and done, we'll have 16 parts of Barbenheimer to talk about.
Okay, 16 seems like a lot. Because by that point, we'll probably be talking about something like Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon.
We hope. Anyway,
we hope.
Well,
from what I understand, that one might not get delayed. I think there's talk that one will still be holding true, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe it'll fall into the same camp as Warner Brothers with Doom Part 2. I don't know. It's a scary thought.
The fall could be absolutely horrifying if all of these films start getting delayed because Hollywood can't get its crap together.
Well, and as we're talking about, apparently they're willing to open or at least reopen negotiations with SAG, and yet at the same time, I think okay, you're willing to do that, but what about the WGA? Like, are we not going to talk
Yeah.
to them? It's like this is just like half the battle at this point.
I read a stat. I don't know how true this is, but I read a stat that if the delays of all of these productions because of the strikes could end up costing the studios billions. But the cost it would take to remedy what SAG wants is just
It's a fraction.
$24 million.
It's a fraction of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just goes
What
to
the
show
heck?
it shows the ego at play as opposed
Yeah,
to the
this
business.
is-
and
it's
this is
nothing
so
but a power
ironic
move.
because these people in power at Hollywood, they claim to be very business savvy, and I trust that maybe they are, but this kind of disproves that, right? I mean,
It's insane.
it's a complete antithesis to what they claim to actually represent.
It's insane. I don't. It makes no sense to me. It's absolutely an ego trip. It's utterly insane. I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, sadness.
At any rate, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay tuned for more Barbenheimer, probably coming soon. Who knows? Stay tuned for all of that. We will see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man. Pirates is so much fun. Oh, it's so good.